All right, so strap in, everyone, because today we are going deep on the Iran-Iraq War.
Oh, yeah.
One of the just absolute brutal conflicts of the 20th century.
That's
I mean,
so
this
quick.
thing had ripple effects across the globe, and we're going to unpack why it mattered
Yeah.
and why, even decades later, it's still shaping the world today.
Right. And I think it's fascinating, not just for like the scale of the battles,
Right.
but because it became this incredible melting pot of like global power struggles, and you had religious fervor and the dangers of unchecked ambition.
Yeah, we're basing this deep dive on a YouTube documentary called Iran-Iraq War, Modern Warfare, Full Army HD documentary by Necromantia's Battle Beats.
Okay.
And it's a pretty stark look at this 8-year war.
It is, and I think to really grasp this conflict, we have to understand that this wasn't just like a border dispute that boiled over.
Right.
The seeds for this were sown long before 1980.
Okay.
Iraq under Saddam Hussein was obsessed with its limited access to the Persian Gulf.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That was their lifeline for oil exports.
So Iran was like a bottleneck.
Exactly.
Okay.
And Saddam never won for subtlety.
Right.
Saw a chance to reshape the whole region.
Yeah.
He figured cripple Iran's oil infrastructure, grab some key cities, and boom, Iraq becomes the big dog in the Gulf.
But didn't Iran just go through a revolution?
Mm-hmm.
You'd think they'd be vulnerable, not ready for a huge war.
You would think so, right? And Saddam certainly did.
Yeah.
But he made a few critical miscalculations.
Okay.
His forces were spread thin, trying to achieve too much at once.
Okay.
And he dramatically underestimated the power of religious fervor.
Okay, so the initial invasion doesn't go as planned.
Right.
But what about the global impact? Was everyone just watching this unfold?
Oh, the world definitely felt it.
Right.
I mean, think about the Shad al-Arab waterway,
Okay.
a crucial shipping route for oil. It got shut down practically overnight. Global oil prices went haywire.
Wow.
And it became this huge wake-up call
Yeah.
that this regional conflict had teeth.
This is where things get really interesting. Iran, despite the revolution, didn't crumble. The documentary actually shows this incredible surge of Iranian nationalism. Ayatollah Khomeini, he really tapped into something powerful.
Absolutely. Khomeini was a master at channeling the revolutionary energy.
Right.
And the Iranian Revolutionary Guards.
Yeah.
They were his devoted force, incredibly disciplined, and they knew the terrain like the back of their hand.
That's got to be a game changer in a war like this.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm picturing Iraq rolling in with tanks, superior firepower, the whole 9 yards.
Right.
How do you counter that?
Well, that's where the battle for Khorramshahr comes in.
Okay.
The documentary calls it the City of Blood.
Yeah.
The fighting there was absolutely savage.
I remember seeing images of that city utterly devastated.
It became a symbol.
Right.
The Iranians fought street by street, house by house.
Wow.
And they eventually recaptured it.
Okay.
This sent a clear message. This wasn't going to be a quick victory for Saddam. This was going to be a long, bloody slog.
And it's here where we see these two starkly different leaders really clash.
Mm-hmm.
On one side, you've got Saddam Hussein, this ruthless dictator with no real military background.
Right.
And on the other, you have Hashemi Rafsanjani, who emerges as a key figure in Iran.
Yep.
While the documentary highlights his charisma, what really stands out is his pragmatism.
Yeah.
He understood that Iran had to adapt to survive,
Yeah.
so they weren't just throwing bodies at the problem.
Not entirely. While there were those horrific human wave attacks driven by this intense belief in martyrdom.
Yeah, those scenes in the documentary are just gut-wrenching.
They are. But what's fascinating is how Iran also adopted tactics from the Viet Cong. Think about their use of frogmen in the marshes, disrupting Iraqi supply lines.
Wow.
It was incredibly resourceful.
It's like they took whatever worked, however unconventional, and
Yeah.
threw it at the Iraqi army.
Exactly. And this contrast in leadership and tactics,
Yeah.
it really set the stage for the next phase of the war. And trust me, it gets even more brutal. Yeah. Yeah, this is where the conflict takes a really dark turn. Imagine like you're a citizen in Tehran and you hear the air raid sirens wail,
Oh, man.
knowing that Iraqi Scud-B missiles are raining down.
Those Scud-B missiles, the documentary mentions them,
Right.
but doesn't really go into detail. What were they capable of?
Well, they weren't exactly known for their accuracy.
Right.
They were more about sowing terror, creating chaos.
Yeah.
Think of it as psychological warfare.
Okay.
You never knew when or where they'd hit.
So this was no longer just about strategic targets. It was about breaking the will of the people.
Exactly. And it wasn't just Iraq doing this.
Right.
Iran retaliated, targeting Baghdad and other Iraqi cities.
Yeah.
The documentary really captures the human toll of this war of the cities,
Right.
the sheer terror of living under constant bombardment.
And the world just stood by and watched.
Well, there were condemnations, of course,
Yeah.
but no one was willing to get dragged into this mess directly. It's a tragic example of how the international community often struggles to effectively intervene in these kinds of conflicts.
It's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
But there's another group caught in the crossfire that we haven't talked about much. The Kurds.
Ah, yes. The Kurds. Imagine you're a Kurdish fighter navigating this treacherous mountain terrain
Yeah.
to sabotage Iraqi pipelines.
Wow.
These acts of sabotage, while seemingly small, had a massive impact on Iraq's ability to fund the war.
So they were exploiting the chaos of the war to push for their own independence.
Precisely. They saw an opportunity in Iran's struggle against Iraq,
Right.
and they were willing to fight for it. This was a chance, however slim, to carve out some autonomy in a region that had denied them that for far too long.
And then there's Halabja. I'm still haunted by the images from the documentary.
Halabja. It's a chilling reminder of the depths of human cruelty.
Yeah.
Saddam, facing resistance from the Kurds, unleashed chemical weapons on the town.
Wow.
Thousands were killed, many of them women and children.
That must have sent shockwaves through the international community.
It did. But even in the face of such a horrific act, the response was largely limited to condemnation.
Right.
There was no decisive action to punish Saddam or prevent future atrocities. It's a painful reminder of the limits of international law in the face of such brutality.
It's a bleak picture. But the war didn't stay confined to land, did it? It spilled over into the Persian Gulf. That's where the tanker war comes in, right?
Yes. And this adds a whole new layer of complexity. Imagine you're a Kuwaiti oil tanker captain,
Right.
sailing through the Gulf knowing that both Iran and Iraq are targeting ships.
Oh, wow.
The tension must have been incredible.
It's like a high-stakes game of chicken
Yeah,
with oil tankers caught in the middle.
exactly. And this is where Kuwait, a small nation with a lot to lose, made a bold move.
Okay.
They started reflagging their tankers under the U.S. flag.
So they were basically seeking protection from the biggest kid on the block.
That's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
Of course, the U.S. wasn't just doing this out of the goodness of their hearts.
Right.
They had their own interests in the region, namely protecting the flow of oil.
So we see the Cold War dynamics playing out here, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union also found itself protecting oil interests in the Gulf. It's a classic case of Cold War maneuvering each superpower, vying for influence, and trying to contain the other.
It's almost like a proxy war within a proxy war. But even with all this chaos, the war did eventually come to an end.
Yes, but not with a bang. It was more of a whimper. In 1988, both sides, exhausted and economically drained, agreed to a ceasefire.
And the outcome, who won?
That's the thing. There were no winners in this war. The documentary makes that very clear.
Right.
It was a stalemate. Iraq, despite its initial aggression, failed to achieve its goals. And Iran, despite its resilience, was left with a devastated economy and a generation lost to the horrors of war.
Yeah, it's a bleak outcome. Years of fighting, countless lives lost. And for what? It seems like everyone involved paid a heavy price.
They did, and the documentary doesn't shy away from that. You see cities in ruins, economies crippled, and a whole generation scarred by the violence they witnessed. It's a stark reminder, I think, of the lasting consequences of war. It's not just about the fighting. It's about the years, even decades of rebuilding and healing that follow.
You know, it's easy to look back at this conflict and think, well, that was then, this is now. But I have a feeling this war cast a long shadow over the region, didn't it?
It absolutely did. And this is where I think the Iran-Iraq war becomes even more relevant to like what we see today.
Correct.
Think about it. The war ended in 1988, but just 2 years later, Iraq invaded Kuwait.
It's like the region never really had a chance to catch its breath.
Exactly. The unresolved issues, the power imbalances, the bitterness left behind, all of that created this incredibly volatile environment.
Right.
The Iran-Iraq war might be over, but its legacy lived on.
So how should we, as people looking back on this conflict, make sense of it all? It's just so complex.
It is complex, but that's why it's so important to understand. This war wasn't just like some isolated event.
Right.
It was a product of history, of regional rivalries, of global power struggles. And its consequences continue to shape the Middle East today.
Yeah, it's a sobering reminder that these conflicts don't just disappear. They leave scars, they shape perspectives, they influence decisions made years, even decades later.
They do, and I would say for anyone listening who wants to really grasp the dynamics of the Middle East today, understanding the Iran-Iraq war is crucial. It's like a key that unlocks so much of what we see happening in the region even now.
It makes you think about the rise of sectarianism, the ongoing conflicts, the political instability. It's hard not to see the echoes of this war and all of that.
It's there, without a doubt.
Mm.
And, as we wrap up our deep dive, I'd like to leave you with this. As you continue to learn about the Middle East, about the conflicts and the complexities, think about the lessons of the Iran-Iraq War.
What lessons stand out to you?
Well, the dangers of unchecked ambition, for one. The human cost of war, always. And the fact that true peace is about more than just silencing the guns. It's about addressing the underlying issues, healing the wounds, and building a future where violence isn't the answer.
It's a powerful message, and I think this deep dive has given us a lot to ponder. The Iran-Iraq War, despite being a relatively recent conflict, is often overlooked.
It is, but as we've seen, it was a pivotal event, one that continues to shape the world we live in today.
Yeah.
And if our conversation today inspires even one listener to dig a little deeper, to learn more about this complex and often tragic conflict, then I think we've accomplished something important.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for guiding us through this deep dive. It's been eye-opening, to say the least.
It was my pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive.